I hope you are fine today. Here we have like 35 degrees. It's an early summer. We did this live, this breaking news, because we had information about recent developments about the mineral oil hydrocarbons level in food. That's a very hot topic. We discuss about those kind of contaminants from at least, I would say, 2 or 3 years in a let's say, uh, in a very structured way. But recently, the Commission, under the pressure of the consumer organization Food Watch, was discussing the possibility to introduce levels for those contaminants in several food categories, if not all food categories. The discussion happened in the Standing Committee for Plants, Animals, Food and Feed of the European Commission when the member states start discussing last year the introduction of levels and, if any, which levels. Following the last two meetings in February and then in April, what happened? Happened that basically the Commission decided, together with a representative of the member states, to move forward very quickly, if not immediately, establishing those limits with a standing committee joint declaration, not with a regulation or with a directive. So basically, in the meeting of the 21st of April, they drafted the declaration that now I will explain briefly to you, and that if you cannot retrieve from internet, you can easily ask us. We can send it to you, and you can write at the email that you can see on the screen to have it, or you can find it on my LinkedIn profile. So what's happened basically? In this last meeting on the 21st of April, the Commission, after the results of this Food Watch monitoring that was focused mainly on food categories like broth, chocolate spreads, chocolate biscuits, and in general, food quite rich in fats, decided to establish certain limits. But which kind of limits? They decided to go for the LOCs, so limits of quantifications, not maximum levels. So as you will see, the numbers that has been given are quite strict. And this would be a problem, but not just for the food categories subject of the study of Food Watch, but for many others like sauces that might be very rich in fats and oils, bakery products, infant formula, and generally speaking, most of the foods with a relevant part of fats that might retain these mineral oil hydrocarbons more easily. From where those mineral oil hydrocarbons might come into your products, into the food, from different sources, fats and oils per se, and we know how critical is in this historical moment the situation with the supplies of oils. So it's not easy to retrieve vegetable oils in general, but it's even more difficult to find vegetable oils that are MOAH free at the moment, since the supply is very tight. So we might have as a source the fats and oils per se, we might have as a source the lubricants used in the processing machine, and we might have as a source that is quoted also by the Commission in the declaration, the food contact materials, especially carton and recycled cartons, and the related inks that are used in those food packaging materials. Inks, but also E905, the microcrystalline wax, the food additive used in food contact materials. So those are the main sources. So you understand very easily that the food categories that might be affected are very, very broad. Coming to the declaration, which are the levels that has been established by the Commission? Well, they decided to split the entire spectrum of the food categories in three different levels, and they set a lock of 0.5 milligram kilos for the dry foods with an amount of fat and oil that is below 4%. A lock of 1 milligram kilo for the foods that have a higher percentage of fats and oils, so above 4%, and a 2 milligram kilo level for fats and oils per se. So this is basically the content of the declaration. But what is strange, compare this situation to others, that the Commission didn't wait for the EFSA opinion on maximum levels for those substances. This is foreseen for, let's say, the next quarter, or let's say by the end of the year. So they didn't wait the EFSA opinion. There are opinions around Europe by food safety agencies, like the French one or the BFR in Germany about those substances, probably others, but there is not a European risk assessment. So they decide to move with urgency here and with no a full set of data. That is quite unusual. So let's take these levels as provisionary, because of course the EFSA opinion might change the situation, but the problem is that those levels has been declared applicable as from the 17th of May 2022, so 3 days ago, sorry, from the day that the declaration has been published on the website of the Commission. And has been clearly stated in the declaration that if any food is above the locks given in the declaration, shall be withdrawn or recalled from the market. And it doesn't matter if the non-compliance has been noted by the competent authorities or by the food operators themselves. So you understand immediately how this might be devastating for the industry if applied immediately and consistently. So just to wrap up a bit, then I'll check if you have comments in the chat that I can address. What's the situation? We have this limit of quantifications that are very, very low, a broad pool of food categories affected. A JRC guidance, I forgot to mention, giving specific criteria for the sampling and analysis that is quoted, of course, by the Standing Committee. And then we have these difficulties linked to the fact that the Commission proceeded, because those substances might be, of course, dangerous for the consumers. So, okay, I don't question here the food safety, the food safety reasoning behind the move of the Commission and the level of protection that they decide to ensure to the consumers. But they proceed with a declaration that technically is not legally binding, provides no transition periods, and not in a crisis situation like the ethylene oxide recent recalls, where of course, there was a urgency to set provisional limits because we didn't have any. We are speaking of those things about mineral oils from years. Now move to a lock so low from one day to another looks quite a tough move for the industry, especially in the catastrophic economic situation that we are having now with raising costs for all the production inputs, scarcity of oils for the war, and so on. The only, I would say, good news for the industry and my clients, because we share already those thoughts with some big companies around, and we try to find a way to manage the situation, at least to contain, the situation, because nobody wants, of course, to be put in danger consumers, but switch from no limits to such strict limits with no transition period, of course, is tough. The only good news is that the enforcement is up to the member states. So the Commission can set the principles, can set those locks, can say, okay, member states, please start to check, do enforcement, but they might not be supported by the national enforcement authorities that, might have a bit more cautious approach. So I would expect enforcement, of course. We cannot say in this very moment in which countries we might see the first enforcement actions, but that's the situation. I'm reading the comments, and Christophe, thank you. There are some interesting ones. I'm reading the first receive. Those levels are not legally binding limits. I know precisely. I just said that, and that's true. The problem is that the enforcement start to implement the draft declaration. You can, of course, challenge the administrative decisions, challenge the eventual sanctions in courts, administrative offices, but still you might be forced to recall or withdraw your products. That's the major damage. So that's what is worrying me most, Christophe, not really the discussion about the limits, because I know that there, as lawyers, we might have a space to operate. Huge difference compared to ETO, where a max limit did exist, yes, in certain food categories, not for all, and where they did not adopted them in some natural extract food additives, yes. And to be honest, the ETO experience was also quite catastrophic in terms of uniformity of the enforcement, because right or wrong, the commissioner at a certain point set criteria for the food additives and all the rest, but then the enforcement didn't follow exactly what the commission was stating. So I managed several huge recalls, multi-country recalls for ETO, and I noticed clearly that someone disattended the indication of the commission, and still the member states were operating under their own, let's say, understanding of the limits and the rule. Yeah, Christophe, you say I'm concerned as well, and especially for Italy, I agree. I would be quite worried also by Germany. They control a lot. They have a risk assessment. They are a very strict country. Netherlands might be a very strict country. No idea about their position at the moment on MOAH, but when they do enforcement, they are pretty, monolithic in their positions. And so, yeah, I share your concerns. Miko, there is another comment. Sorry, just to clarify, are these legal MRLs or orientation values? Even in the latter, private labs and retail will take them as such, I'm afraid. Well, it's hard to say, Miko, because honestly, and Belgium, Christophe is adding, yeah, they might be as well. It's hard to say. If you read the declaration, I'd be happy to send it to you in a few minutes. I would really say that those levels, qualified as locks, are legal MRLs, let's say, not legally binding because not containing a regulation or a directive, but still intended as legal limits, because the Commission is absolutely clear in stating that in theory we should see enforcement, and that if any food business operator or controlling authorities is finding on the market foods with level of MOAH above the given logs, a recall or a withdrawal should be made. So if the food is considered at risk under Article 14 of the Regulation 1168, the General Food Law, and you have to activate the procedures under Article 19 to do a recall or a withdrawal, to me, that's like a legal limit. Yeah, but it's a bit weak, this position, since it's been assumed by a standing committee and not with a legally binding act. So those, to me, are the main point of the declaration. If there are no other comments, I can close the live, and the video will be available on the platform. I see some comments, some thank you to be here. That's a pleasure. And Christophe, they say there are action levels. Yeah, but in theory, not sufficient to trigger a recall unless those action levels are transposed at national level and published under national act. Yeah, again, that's the correct legal theory. Christophe, being a colleague, I agree with you. What is scaring me most is this statement that everything should be recalled under those LMRLs, and the fact that the authorities usually stick to this kind of inputs coming from the Commission without thinking too much about the legal nuances, since they are mostly veterinarians, food safety experts, and by the way, they are binded also hierarchically to the instructions that comes from the head of their ministry, of their authority. So it's really, I guess now it's really a lot about how the national competent authorities at central level will receive this declaration, will intend this declaration, and which kind of instructions they will give to the inspectors. It will be interesting, thinking of MIC also, to understand if all the member states have the same capability in terms of laboratory to detect and provide accredited analysis, accredited results to the enforcement. Because if your analytical capacity is weak as an enforcement system, you will be also in worse difficulties in enforce those kind of limits, because they won't be just not technically legally binding, but also you won't be able to provide a solid proof that those limits has been exceeded. So that's it. If there's not anything more, I'll wish you a very good weekend. You can write me at the email, generic email here, and be in touch soon. Bye-bye.